All right, Doug, since you got your mic off, do you mind leading us in a word of prayer?
Sure. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the many blessings that we can find within this day. We thank you for all you do for us each and every day. We thank you for this hour that we have to study from your word. And we thank you for Diondre that just put this lesson together. Thank you for the entire study that we've had from the books of Kings. It's been a wonderful study, and just so thankful for your word that we have to learn from and to apply it to our lives to better ourselves. Pray that you will go with us as we go through this study. Help our minds to be able to be acclimated to your word in such a way that we can understand it better. Also be with all of those, there are many on our prayer list right now. Be with each and every one of those. Watch over them and help lift them up, bring them back to a better state of health. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you. I forgot to get the PowerPoint up. Should only take me a second, though. All right. We should all see that now.
Yes.
All right. Couldn't find a good background for this one, so it's the best I can do. Only one generation is the name of this lesson. This is 2 Kings chapter 21. And I named it that because, Hezekiah was a very good king. His father was a very bad king, Ahaz. He was the worst king. As far as I'm concerned, he was the worst king that they had. But Hezekiah was a very good king, maybe in the top 3 kings that Israel ever had, or that Judah ever had. And then his son comes after him. He's just totally the opposite. So only takes one generation to make things better or make things worse. So, all right, let's get a little background here. Number 1, Hezekiah, a great king, has passed on from this life, and now his son Manasseh has taken his place on the throne. Number 2, Manasseh is almost nothing like his father Hezekiah, and the only thing that they share is this. The only thing that they share that is the same is the fact that they are both incredibly zealous. Hezekiah was very zealous to serve the Lord, but Manasseh was very zealous to serve everyone but the Lord. So they're both very zealous, but sometimes being zealous, depending on how you direct that, that can matter. So you'll kind of see that in this chapter. Quick text breakdown, 5 sections. Number 1, Manasseh's awful reign, Manasseh's sins, Manasseh's death, Ammon's pointless reign. Ammon is his son. He gets a quick mention at the end of the chapter, and then Ammon's assassination. So, all right, once again, you've seen this chart every week, but let me just bring it back up. You've got Hoshea, the last king of Israel, of the northern kingdom, and he was gone in 721 BC, taken away by the Assyrians, and the Assyrians obviously attacked Hezekiah. If you remember, Hezekiah had the Great War, and that I talked about over the last couple of weeks, and tried to take Judah, but Hezekiah went to Isaiah, and God was on the side of Hezekiah because Hezekiah was on God's side. And so God rescued them out of that. And Sennacherib went home, and his own sons actually assassinated him. So that's interesting. After Hezekiah comes Manasseh, who's the main individual we're going to talk about in this particular chapter. Manasseh doesn't get enough recognition. He's to me one of the best kings to learn about. Not the best king they had, but the best king to learn about, at least one of them in my opinion. And then you have Ammon, who I said he gets a quick mention. After that we get Josiah, and Josiah is quite a king. So I'm looking forward to next week when we learn about him. All right, let's get right into the text here. Manasseh's awful reign, verses 1 and 2 of 2 Kings 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. So he's 12 years old when he begins to reign. It's very young. One thing I don't think I've pointed out since we started learning this is that when you see these really young ages, yes, they begin to reign. Oh, excuse me, my Siri thinks I'm talking to her. 1 second. I don't know what's going on now. It's playing music. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so Manasseh is 12 years old when he begins to reign. One of the things I hadn't mentioned, Josiah, for example, he's going to become king at the age of 8. You had Joash, who became king at the age of 6. So these really, really young kings, they're not really sitting on the throne and making decisions for the people. They're obviously not competent enough to do that at their age. They wouldn't be prepared for that. It's a very mature thing, something you have to really be ready for. So what ends up happening is generally one of two things happens. It turns kind of into what we have here at Fairfax, like a men's meeting, where you have certain leaders of the land who make the decisions while they're training up the king who is soon to make decisions, probably not until the age of 20. And then you have, or you have that they will serve with their fathers, the king. And so it'll say their reign starts, but they're actually just a prince at the time. So in this particular case, history says that he was a prince. He served with Hezekiah, his dad, as king. So he wasn't really there wasn't really a 12-year-old sitting on the throne making decisions for people. Obviously, that wouldn't be good.
Right.
That's not good for 12-year-olds to have that much authority. So, but it says he reigned 55 years. So that's a long reign. I mean, he had a good long reign. Even though he wasn't a very good king, he had a good long reign. Notice that it says he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, obviously, that is something that you don't hear very often about the kings of the southern kingdom. You heard it with Ahaz. That was the first king that you heard it with. But unfortunately, he wasn't the last king you're going to hear it with. But in the north, that's what they said for every king. They did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So it's kind of interesting that now you're hearing this for the kings of the south now, too. Kind of shows you that they had already kind of gone down that slippery slope, and now they're headed in the same direction, unfortunately. So he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the despicable practices of the nations that the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, meaning that he's now doing the things that God drove the people out of the land of Canaan for when they first came in the first place, which isn't a good thing. What's also sad is that 6 of the last 7 kings of Judah are evil. So that's not good. Once again, shows you they're kind of in a downhill slide from this point. Kind of started with Ahaz, and now it's going to pick up pretty big here with Manasseh. So, all right, continuing with his awful reign in verses 3 through 5, it says, "For he rebuilt the high places that Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and he erected the altars for Baal and made an Asherah, as Ahab king of Israel had done, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord had said in Jerusalem, I will put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord." All right. Like I said, it only takes one generation. His dad tore down the high places. Hezekiah was the first king who had the backbone to do that. And his son ends up being the one to put them right back in right after that. Talk about being ashamed of your children here. This would obviously be something that Hezekiah would be rolling over in his grave if he knew that his son did that. But he did that. It also says in verse 4, he built altars in the house of the Lord. So not only did he put the high places back, he took the temple and stopped worshiping the one true God and started worshiping idols in the house of the Lord. Now, call that one of the greatest acts of disrespect, because in your house, right, you have certain rules and expectations and things. And so does God, right? But when people come into your house and disrespect your rules, that's offensive, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So basically, they came in and committed the ultimate offense of worshiping other gods in the house of God. Not only did they worship other gods, but they decided to do it where God was to be worshipped, where only God was to be worshipped. So everything the previous generation had fixed, he comes in, he tears it down. All right, continuing with his terrible reign. In verses 6 and 7, it says, and he burned his son as an offering, and used fortune telling and omens, and dealt with mediums and necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. And the carved image of Asherah that he had made, he set in the house, of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. So one of the worst offenses you see here is that he burned his son as an offering. So remember, I told you guys about the hands. They would heat up the hands of, or sometimes they would heat up a bull, and then you would put a human inside of it, and then you would just burn them alive. He did that to his own son. So this kind of shows you what kind of a king he is. You know, he's so wicked that just like Ahaz, his grandfather, he kills his own children in one of the worst ways that we could possibly imagine in the world. So problematic, isn't it? In verses 8 and 9, it says, and I will not cause the feet of Israel to wander any more out of the land that I gave to their fathers, if only they will be careful to do according to all that I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. But they did not listen, and Manasseh led them astray to do more evil than the nations had done, whom the Lord destroyed before the prophets of Israel. So notice how it says at the beginning of verse 9, where I have it underlined there, it says, but they did not listen. They did not listen. Now, that's key there, because that's the problem with people in every generation. Would you guys agree or disagree?
I agree.
What do you guys think?
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
People don't listen. that's the problem. You know, people don't. You know, even within my own house, Kason doesn't listen. Right? He doesn't listen, and that's problematic. So, in the case of the Lord always reaching out for us, you're telling people what God wants them to know, and they don't listen. That's the problem. People don't listen. And it's not just that they don't hear, right? Because listening is not just about hearing, is it? It's about understanding and accepting as well, and being able to make a decision based on that. But they weren't in it to even listen, right? They didn't want any of that. They didn't take it that far. In their minds, it was seed like the seed that's thrown on the wayside that Jesus talked about. The devil
Right.
comes and snatches it up. It's kind of like that for them. They don't listen. Their ears are closed. They quit listening. So because of that, Manasseh leads them astray to do more evil, because they're listening to him and they quit listening to God. In 2 Kings chapter 21, verses 10 and 11. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm in the right spot. 2 Kings chapter 21, verses 10 and 11. It says, and the Lord said by his servants, the prophets, because Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these abominations and has done things more evil than all that the Amorites did who were before him, and has made Judah also to sin with his idols. Well, that's kind of a half sentence, but just to go back to verse 10, the Lord said by his servants, the prophets. So God was actually sending prophets to speak to them. So that's who they weren't listening to. They weren't listening to the prophets. Let me give you there's at least a few prophets who are, I feel fairly sure are preaching during this time. One of them is Hosea. Another's Joel, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Isaiah. And so you got these prophets speaking at this time, and these are big name prophets. These aren't, everyday prophets. And God is sending it to them. So God is actually reaching out to them. This wasn't something where they did wrong and then God was just waiting for them waiting to strike them down. God was actually reaching out to them. He was sending his prophets, and they weren't listening. Once again, they just didn't want to listen. So, therefore, in verses 12 and 13, therefore, this says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am bringing upon Jerusalem and Judah such disaster that the ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. And I will stretch over Jerusalem the measuring line of Samaria and the plumb line of the house of Ahab. And I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. Now that's three different kind of, let's call them metaphors that God kind of uses here to make his point. He says, I'm bringing upon Jerusalem and Judah such disaster that the ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. And I think that's kind of a hard one to figure out. What does he mean by their ears are going to tingle? I think what he means by that is that they're going to finally listen. They're going to finally hear, and they're going to think, oh no, something is actually going to happen, but it's going to be too late. The disaster's already come. That's kind of what I think God is referencing there. And then he says, I will stretch over Jerusalem the measuring line of Samaria and the plumb line of the house of Ahab. So essentially what he's saying is, I'm going to judge them in the same way I judged Samaria and Ahab. And if you remember, Samaria, that's the capital of the northern kingdom. And Ahab was the one who really took the northern kingdom into idolatry. And remember, he was married to Jezebel, and then his daughter was named Athaliah, all them crazy folks we read about a few weeks ago. And then he says, and I will wipe Jerusalem as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. Now that was the most interesting kind of metaphor that God uses here. And what I think God is saying here, and I really had to work to try to figure this one out. Jerusalem, let's say everybody in Jerusalem is in the bowl or in the dish. If you wipe the dish is clean, right? So now if God wipes the dish of Jerusalem and turns it upside down, that means he's going to take everyone out of it. So he's going to wipe it out, turn it upside down, so that way everything that's in it is going to come out of it and it's going to be clean. Kind of the idea, kind of an interesting way. God obviously speaks more profoundly than humans. Interesting way to put it. Any questions, by the way, so far?
He was going to clean house, I think.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to put it. I like that. He was going to clean house, take care of business, and just get rid of everybody, right? Right. Kind of almost similar. You guys remember in the days of Noah, he just, in the same way, he cleaned house, right? He just wiped everybody out and said, okay, starting with these. So that's what he's going to do with them later on. So that's a prophecy of what's going to happen in the coming years to them at this time. So, all right. In verses 14 and 15, he says, and I will forsake the remnant of my heritage and give them into the hand of their enemies, and they shall become a prey and a spoil to all of their enemies, because they have done what is evil in my sight and have provoked me to anger since the day their fathers came out of Egypt, even to this day. So notice how he says in verse 14, I will forsake. I will forsake. Now, God has always promised never to leave or forsake us, right?
Right.
So why is he forsaking them?
I think he's had enough.
Okay. Is God breaking his promise?
They forsook him first.
There you go. Yeah. So they ran away from him. So he says, okay, all right, you broke the covenant. I made a covenant with you. In my covenant, I said I wouldn't leave you or forsake you. You broke the covenant. Because of that, I'm going to forsake you. Now, the truth is, even though God may forsake his people, he never truly forsakes his people, does he?
No.
He doesn't forsake them in the same way we forsake him, ever. So in verse 16, he mentions the fact that they've been doing what is evil since the day that their fathers came out of Egypt, even to this day. So this is God saying, okay, ever since I took you guys out of Egypt, you have been a problem for me. I'm going to fix this problem now. Now, this has been 900 years coming. 900 years. That's a long time. So nobody can say that God was not patient with them. Would you guys agree or disagree?
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, God has been extremely patient. 900 years, God has given them opportunity after opportunity. He has sent prophet after prophet. He has performed miracle after miracle. He has provided for them, given them everything that they need. And now he's saying, okay, 900 years is long enough. It's time for you guys to get your act together. It is time. It is way past time. So now God is saying, all right, I'm going to handle this problem at this time. Now in verse 16, notice just how bad Manasseh is. Moreover, Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem from one end to another, besides the sin that he made Judah to sin, so that he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he filled Jerusalem from one end to another. Now, obviously, that's an exaggeration. That's a hyperbole. But the point is that he was a murderous king. He was not the kind of person you want sitting on the throne. And this is so reminiscent of the Northern Kingdom. So reminiscent. They just kind of, it's always sad. We always have to be on guard because the world moves at a certain pace and the church tends to move at that pace just a little closely, a little bit slower, but a little too closely. And we always have to be careful as Christian people not to make the same mistake that they make, because we can. We can. They were human. We're human. We can make the very same mistakes that they did as well. So let me take you guys over to the Chronicle. Well, actually, before I move to the next section, you guys want to make any comments or questions or anything? Let me, I want to take us over to the Chronicles for just a second, because the Kings does not record what happens to Manasseh after this point. But he sounds, I told you Ahaz was really the worst king that Judah ever had. And when you're reading Manasseh, you're going to think, how is that possible? Because Manasseh sure sounds worse. And he does sound worse, but there's one reason why I don't think he is. And that's because it's recorded in the Chronicles that he has a change of heart. He does have a change of heart. In 2 Chronicles 33, verses 10 through 11, it says, the Lord spoke to Manasseh and to his people, but they paid no attention. Once again, they weren't listening. Therefore, the Lord brought upon them the commanders of the army of the king of Assyria, who captured Manasseh with hooks and bound him with chains of bronze and brought him to Babylon. Okay, let me show you what that might look like. What do you guys think about that?
Ouch.
Does that look painful?
Yes.
It's painful. It's humiliating. I mean, it's just all around bad. There's nothing positive in this, obviously. And so the Lord, to punish them, he sends them the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria brings them into the land of Babylon. And obviously this was a horrible event, but this was God's judgment upon them for what they had done. But continuing in verses 12 and 13, it says, and when he was in distress, he entreated the favor of the Lord his God, and he humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. He prayed to him, and God was moved by his entreaty and heard his plea and brought him again to Jerusalem into his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. So I've underlined here, when he was in distress. Okay. So when he was in distress, he entreated the favor of the Lord. Is that okay? What do you guys think?
What do you mean?
Is it okay if, okay, think about Manasseh's life. Up until this point, he has done nothing but disrespect everything in relation to God. But now in a moment of distress, he reaches out to God. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's better than not reaching out to God at all, even when he is in distress. So yeah, I see it as a good thing.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think, he realized and finally had a change of heart. So yeah, we have that option too,
Unfortunately, it takes something like that with some
Yeah.
people. You'll always notice that when people go through a hard time, they go to church, right?
Yeah.
I grew up with a friend of mine, and this was, I didn't really know anything about church. He grew up in a Southern Baptist church, but he didn't really go to church. And I remember he was having a hard time, and he called me on a Saturday night and said, hey, you want to go to church in the morning? And honestly, I didn't want to go because I didn't know anything about church, and I wasn't interested in God or anything. And but he was my friend, so I said, sure, I'll go with you. And we went to church, and I don't think I paid attention to a word that the preacher said. I remember there were a few kind people. But I remember he was just in a moment of distress. And when we left, we got in the car and he said, I feel a lot better. And we never went back. We never went back. And that always stuck with me because I always thought, it's sad that that's how he kind of viewed it, was I was having a bad day. I'm going to go to church. And then after I leave, I'm going to forget about it. That, of course, that's looking back in hindsight. So.
Mm-hmm.
So moments of distress tend to drive people towards God. Notice God's response. He says, and God was moved by his entreaty. He was moved. So God felt it. God, when you're moved by something, you kind of, it's more of an emotional response more than a logical response. You're moved by it. And then it says he brought him again to Jerusalem into his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. And it took all of that, but that was the whole point in what God did in the first place. The whole point was to wake everybody up, right? God was shaking everybody awake, saying, okay, it's time for you guys to wake up. I'm going to have to make things really bad for you, but wake up. Time to wake up. So in verses 16 and 17, now we got to go back to the Kings. That's the end of the Chronicles there. Actually, let me add a couple of things in regard to that. Oh, I missed something here. 2 Kings 21:16. Or did I? I think I missed something. Well, it's too late now, so I guess we'll just keep going. All right. In verses 16 and 17, it says he also, we're still in the Chronicles, but I put Kings, I think. I think that's what happened. Yeah, that's right. So this is 2 Chronicles 21. No, 2 Chronicles 33, just to make sure I've got this right. Let me get my physical Bible here. I apologize. I don't want to mix you guys up too much. I think I must have just mixed myself up as I was preparing this. 2 Chronicles, that should be 33, verses 16 and 17. Yeah, so this is, I apologize, it says 2 Kings 21, but it's actually 2 Chronicles 23, verses 16 and 17, if you guys are taking notes. So 2 Chronicles 33, verses 16 and 17, he also restored the altar of the Lord and offered on it sacrifices of peace offerings and of thanksgiving, and he commanded Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. Nevertheless, the people still sacrificed at their high places, but only to the Lord their God. Okay, so like I said, he has a change of heart. He fixes everything that he broke in the temple, and then he tells everybody to worship only the God of Israel. And then, but unfortunately, in verse 17, it says, nevertheless, the people still sacrificed at the high places. Well, why? Well, obviously, it's because sometimes when you start something, it's hard to stop it. And, sometimes you do something negative, you can't always stop it. And unfortunately, he took everyone in the wrong direction, and they stayed that way. Within his lifetime, he couldn't re-influence people to go back. Unfortunately, they were so wrapped up in that. But at least it says, but only to the Lord their God. So at least they worshiped God on the high places. But still, that's not the kind of worship that God wanted. They were only supposed to worship in Jerusalem. So, all right, let's look at Manasseh's death. Going back to 2 Kings 17 or 2 Kings 21 verses 17 and 18. I'm so sorry. You guys are probably so confused. I apologize.
No problem.
Verses 17 and 18 say, now the rest of the acts of Manasseh and all that he did and the sin that he committed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Manasseh slept with his fathers and was buried in the garden of his house, in the garden of Uzzah, and Amon his son reigned in his place. So his son's going to take his place. Manasseh had a good long reign. He was a very wicked king, and then he was a very good king at the end of his life. And we're glad to see that he had a change of heart. But now Amon is going to take his place. And it doesn't seem like Amon much cared about his dad's change of heart later in life. And he's going to have a pretty pointless reign. So in verses 19 and 20, Amon was 22 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 2 years. 2 years, that's it. His dad got 55, he gets 2. That's not good. In verse 20, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, as Manasseh his father had done. So he followed in his father's footsteps, even though his dad had a change of heart at the end of his life. That's unfortunate. In verses 21 and 22, he walked in all the way in which his father walked and served the idols that his father served and worshiped them. He abandoned the Lord, the God of his fathers, and did not walk in the way of the Lord. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory. He's as bad as his father was at the beginning of his reign. And now this is where things kind of change up here and are different for the southern kingdom. In verses 23 and 24, and the servants of Ammon conspired against him and put the king to death in his house. But the people of the land struck down all those who conspired against King Ammon, and the people of the land made Josiah his son king in his place. So they put him to death in his house. Now this isn't good, because even though Ammon was an evil king, now you have assassinations happening. Is that good or bad?
That's bad.
Okay. Was Ammon the rightful king? Did he steal the throne?
I don't think so.
No, he was the rightful king, right? He was. But unfortunately, some group of people decided that they didn't like him. Now, he was probably not a very likable king. We can agree with that. But assassinating the rightful heir to the throne, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, no matter if the person was bad, even if he wasn't a good king. You have to think about it like this. As I was going through this, it doesn't matter. In fact, I don't care how you feel about our current president or how you feel about our last president or the president we had before him or however you feel about them. I would say in general, no matter how you feel about any of the presidents that we have had, I would say it's a bad thing if they get assassinated. What do you guys think?
Yes, it is bad.
Yeah, I think it's bad for the country.
Yes.
So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I wasn't around in 1963, which I think was our last presidential assassination. But I know just from speaking to my parents and people that were, the whole country was in mourning. People that didn't vote for Kennedy and didn't really like Kennedy, it was still a lot of sadness for the country in general. It's never a good thing, whether you like the president or agree with him or you supported him or voted for him. It's pretty much the whole country was in kind of a state of shock and sadness when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not good for a country for assassinations to happen. That just means that there's a dysfunction, there's issues. It means there's going to be a power struggle. That's how it was in the North. Remember all the assassinations they had? It's just one murderer after another taking the throne. And you don't want that. You need consistency, even if it's not necessarily the best king in the world. You need some level of consistency. So, but thankfully, well, I don't know, thankfully. See, this kind of challenged me in verse 24. But the people of the land struck down all those who conspired against King Ammon. So the assassins were assassinated. What do you guys think? Is that okay, or is that good, or is that bad?
And they were kind of brought to justice, and that was kind of the law at the time.
Mm-hmm. Should we? Somebody, well, let me make sure I ask this right. Even though it's a bad thing for this to happen, we don't want a murderer on the throne, do we?
No.
And we want to bring murderers to justice, don't we?
Yes.
So, in my opinion, this was the right thing to do. Tough thing. That's a tough thing. But I think the right thing to do, at the very least, was make sure that they don't lead. You don't want a murderer on the throne. The throne wasn't theirs to have. It was Josiah's place. It was Ammon's place, but they killed Ammon, so that means it went to Josiah. It was Josiah's place. So the people, I would say, probably did the right thing. but still the whole situation is just terrible. I mean, from beginning to end, just terrible. So interesting, isn't it?
Mhm.
Okay. We in the chapter here, verses 25 and 26. Now the rest of the acts of Ammon that he did, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And he was buried in his tomb in the garden of Uzzah, and Josiah his son reigned in his place. So, all right. Any questions or comments?
No.
I think you guys are going to enjoy Josiah. I said there's like a top 3 kings. You have David, you have Hezekiah, and you have Josiah. Josiah is in that top 3 kings. Josiah is almost as good as David. He might even be better than David. So we'll see. We'll see about that next week.
How long did he reign?
I'm not sure. I don't remember how long he reigned. But he was like Hezekiah, but he was even greater than Hezekiah. Hezekiah did all those reforms. He got rid of all the high places and did all that. Josiah does that, but he does even more. Like he really does a great job. So, and he was only 8 when he became king. So
It says he reigned 31 years.
31. That's a decent reign. Not as much as 55, but 31 is pretty good. So, unfortunately, go ahead.
How's that work if he's like 8 and you say there's people running the show?
Mm-hmm.
Were these the leftovers from the other king?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably just, kind of like, presidents always have a political cabinet. So there probably was some kind of political cabinet. It probably was a mixed bag of good kings and bad kings. But are good counselors and bad counselors. So that's interesting. I hadn't considered that. But Josiah, you have to think Josiah is being trained by these men to be a king, and
Right.
he grows into being one of the best kings. So they couldn't have been too bad.
Right.
They couldn't have been too bad. So good question.
Well,
I'd never thought about that. Yeah. All right. I think that's it. Get us